Well, good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dave Cowell. I am the outgoing board president, and I would like to call the 2023 annual membership meeting of the AAVSO in session. And we would begin with the reading of the minutes from last year's meeting. Chris?
Oh, great. The clicker, oh, it's on there too.
One more, I guess.
Yep. Oh, supposed to be the memoriam.
Yeah, it's like we're.
Okay,
so
go ahead. It's not in order.
Oh, it looks like we're out over there.
Oh, well, we're really out of order, so why don't you?
Go ahead. Walk, go ahead and do the welcome.
Well, we're welcome.
Okay.
So do your
wanna do the
memorial.
first?
Yeah.
So Brian threw me under the bus the other day, and so I'm gonna throw him under the bus. He got the slides in the wrong order, so.
Yeah, yep. I'll take that one. So thanks, Dave. All right, so we're in session. Welcome to the welcome this morning. I hope you all had a great evening last night. The Argolander dinner was also quite enjoyable as well. So as is tradition, the AAVSO likes to honor the members of the organization that have passed away in the last couple of years. And we do that by showing everybody's pictures up here on the slide. You'll also notice, if they have an observer code up there, so you can a lot of people recognize folks by observer codes instead. I'll proceed by reading everybody's names one at a time, and then we'll observe a moment of silence at the end. James Arnold. Robert Martin Ayers. Lewis M. Cook. Robert Evans. Brian Frazier. Robert Bob Nelson. Anne Saladega. Patrick Schmier. Virgil Skirta. Stephen Sharpie. Brian Warner. Cameron Wilkerson. And Winston Wilkerson. So will you please observe a moment of silence for our colleagues? Thank you.
How's the secretary?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Good morning, everyone. So to remind you, a year ago, we were in Tucson, Arizona, meeting online on Zoom and in person. And we again began with an in memoriam for those we had lost. And I again had given the minutes of the previous membership meeting. At that time, Bob Stevens had given an overview of the financials. The investments last year in the previous year for the endowment funds were just over 14 million, a sharp decline because of the bear market. The building was sold on September 30th, 2022 for $3.175 million, netting just over $3 million after expenses. A question was asked about the building lease. It is a 5-year lease with an inflationary increase in rent built in. A question was asked about increasing dues. A base fee was already scheduled to increase slightly that year. The cost of annual meetings was brought up. It was explained that the previous year's meeting was more costly due to the spectroscopy workshop, but we also had an NSF grant to partially cover it. It was noted that conferences are more expensive post-COVID due to increased AV costs for hybrid meetings. Editor Nancy Morrison gave report on JAAVSO as an open access journal. We have lots of readership, and we also waive page charges for members. And she also gave a brief report on enhancements that we had planned to do in the future. Brian gave his executive director report, introduced the board members, staff, and contractors. He gave us an idea of our healthy membership growing at about 1,200 and active observers holding steady between about 800 to 1,000. The databases continued to grow with over 53 million observations in AID, for example, and alerts and campaigns continued to increase. And we also continued to be cited in the scientific literature. Brian also gave us an overview of the new headquarters facility at 185 Alewife Suite 410 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, before introducing his vision for the organization, and noted that he had been working remotely out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. He learned very quickly that the organization faced several challenges, including resources, business procedures, and maintaining relevance in modern astronomy. Concerning data quality, a task force was going to be made to define the problem and suggest recommendations. Brian's vision, as explained, was to build on the healthy aspects but embrace change to remain relevant. Members were encouraged to speak about the AAVSO at local and regional astronomy clubs, write articles for popular magazines, and volunteer for the organization. There was a discussion on the sustainability of the databases, and their future has been taken care of. As usual, there were questions about the drawdown on the endowment. Bob Stevens answered and said that our goal is and has been 4%. We were at the 4% goal before the market volatility, and we hope to be back as soon as possible. President Kowal reviewed the election process and introduced the new board members. At that time, it was Peter Below, Pat Boyce, and Arnie Hendon, and acknowledged the members who were rotating off the board. Sarah Beck was recognized for 33 years as a staff member. The Merit Award last year was given to Franz Joseph Hamsch remotely for his prolific CCD observations. Dennis Conti was given the William Tyler Olcott Distinguished Service Award, gave the William Tyler Olcott Distinguished Service Award to Lauren Harrington for her mentorship in spectroscopy and other work for the organization. And Brian presented that year's Director's Award for Richard Berry in recognition of his numerous contributions. A special award was given to Dr. Matthew Craig for his volunteer work to the organization, and especially for efforts to introduce students. Brian presented a special award to Ukrainian observers for continuing their science under the current difficult situations, and observer awards were given to individuals reaching various milestones. Kathy recognized the headquarters staff for their hard work during a year of transition, and Elizabeth was given special recognition for 43 years of service and efforts during the move. Elizabeth made note of Kathy's hard work as interim executive director, and the membership meeting concluded only 15 minutes over schedule. Respectfully submitted, Chris Larson, Secretary.
Thank you, Chris. Now I'd like to ask Bob Stevens if he would come up and give our treasurer's report.
Here, I thought I was given the secretary's report. Do we have a? Okay, great. The big green arrow, good. Okay, the treasurer's report, and you just heard some highlights from last year. And here's preliminary results for our fiscal year ended September 30th, 2023, which would be the center column of numbers there. We go through an annual audit process, which usually takes several months. The big adjustments have been made. There will be a few smaller adjustments that need to be put into this, but this is within a few $1,000s at this point. I'm trying to read these numbers at such an oblique angle, which I can't, so I'll just try to remember them. The top line up there is cash, which we have approximately $500,000 of cash. These are in our local accounts. And the second line down there is the investment, which we sometimes call the endowment, even that being a slightly incorrect term, but close enough. Our investments are managed by Raymond James, an investment advisory firm. And I'll give a little bit of a investment report also in the absence of Sarah, that these are managed. They've made lots of recommendations as to what funds to put in. We're tracking very, very close to our peers and the S&P 500. These are numbers that we review every quarter and make adjustments and reallocations as necessary. You'll notice that the amount of the endowment, the investment pool, has gone up substantially with the recovery of the stock market, at least through June. And anybody following their 401ks knows that it's gone sideways or slightly down since June, and even more since then. But that's the market for you. It'll be back someday. Fixed assets, that's just a few computers around the office and, you know, some telescopes and things like that. Other assets, that's a rather big number. And most of it is an accounting entry now required by generally accepted accounting principles we've all been following in the news lately. But basically, that's the value of our lease over the next, 3 years, I think we have let to run on it. And then there's a few other things like some prepaid costs in this meeting, things like that. So we can see that the total assets are about $16 million. From that, we would subtract a few liabilities. Current liabilities is normally some accounts payable, credit card bills payable, things like vacation accrued for the employees and stuff like that. The long-term liability is the offset to the other assets, and that's simply, we treat our lease like a loan these days on financial statements, and that's what that is. We've booked our lease up as if it were a loan to a bank. Why? Who knows? So at anywho, the fund balances then is the difference between those two numbers, and simply is broken out into two categories, those that come with donor restrictions and those that don't. So I'm going to move on from there, hopefully keep this within my 10-minute time frame. This is a grandiose version of our profit and loss statement. The real information is on the far two columns on the right, and the second one from the right is the current year results. And what we can see is that we did fairly well this year. Why? Because of the growth of the stock market, the recovery of the stock market. It shows that we actually made $1 million almost on the bottom line, but the devil's in the details, of course. Now, this presentation is broken out very similar to how our tax return is going to appear and how the audited financial statements will appear, in that we create several buckets that make up that total figure on the right side. We have our program expenses, we have our overhead G&A expenses, we've got some fundraising expenses, and then we got a few expenses related to donor restricted funds and that sort of thing. And for board purposes, we have separated the remainder of the endowment fund out just so that we can see it, so that we're not confusing ourselves with what's going into the G&A column. So the bottom line is that I'm not going to show you the budget versus actual. We went over budget slightly for two big reasons, one of which was our IT contract we had to keep longer than we had wanted to. And last year's meeting in Tucson went over budget by a fair amount of money. So bottom line is, in this last fiscal year, we ended up spending about $100,000 more than we had wanted to in the budget. Fortunately, of course, we have that $500,000 up there, but we're working very, very hard to keep within budget for future years and to try to find ways to keep the expenses down whenever possible. And the fact that our new accounting system actually gives us some detailed, granular information on each and every program that we spend money on, which is very useful in the future for budgetary purposes. I'll just leave you with a couple of slides here. Our revenues, as we treat in our overhead expense, G&A columns, shows that the lion's share of our revenues comes from the draw in the endowment fund. That's always been true over the last 20 years and will be true for the foreseeable future until we can get some big grants. It's this year was 65, 70%. I can't read the number from here. And there's some other things, the meeting revenue, and we do get some contributions. That's your annual campaign. We came up a little bit short on that this year. Last year, actually. We're hoping to do better this year. We'll see. and just a few other odds and ends of revenue. So that's where we get our money from. And the expenses, as always, the personnel expenses are 2/3 of all of our expenses. And we have a few other things, operating expenses, which got office leases in there and utilities and a whole bunch of other little things. And I can't read the rest, but bottom line, this hasn't changed, but by a few percent one way or the other from what it has been for the last several years. It's what our budget is based upon. So at this point, since I know I'm over time, I will.
7 minutes left.
No, you gave me 10 minutes on the schedule you gave me. That's why I've been rushing through it. Okay, we got some time for questions then. I know there's 1 or 2 or 10 out there. Who's got the question? Raise your hand.
How is the?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Or I can repeat it if necessary.
Brian can choose to answer, or Kathy. How is the new office space working out, for example, compared to the old building we had?
Kathy should answer that. And Kathy needs to make her way to the microphone.
The new office is working out really nicely. It's a beautiful space. Everyone has their own office. We have an elevator, which is nice for a few of us that are getting up there. And it's in a great neighborhood, and it's very safe. And we have room for all of our what records we have left. And I don't think any of the staff would disagree with me. So thank you very much for including that in the budget. The old space was really historic, but it had its challenges: leaky roof, HVAC system that didn't always work, little creatures coming out of the walls, things like that. We don't have any of that anymore, so it is an improvement. So thank you.
Okay,
Given we're renting instead of owning, like in past years, is the long-term rental consistent with our budget and sustainable?
The answer is yes, we do believe that the long-term rental, we are 2 years now into, well, year and a half into a 5-year lease. And the budget has been created to cover that scenario. Now, as we all know, post-COVID, things have changed quite a lot, and we'll reevaluate that at the time we get to it. But yes, basically the cost of the rental was similar to the cost of maintaining and operating the old building. It did not add all that much to the expense situation, especially considering the return on investment that we get from the endowments on that $3 million.
I would comment on that as well, that what it does provide for us is flexibility. I mean, we could purchase again, we could go all virtual, we could relocate to some other spot if we find that in the future they sell the building where we're currently renting or something. So I think that flexibility is important as well. As Yogi Berra said, the future is always difficult to predict.
I got 3 minutes, time for maybe one question.
Yeah,
Whose question is it?
And Mario will also comment that having a lease rather than a fixed asset up in Cambridge has been pretty good from my perspective, because I've been able to hire people that we normally wouldn't have had access to. The AAVSO is now 50% in person and 50% remote. Like Root Boop, our software developer, he's actually down in Texas. Lauren, who was a contractor, she's now an employee. She's in Oklahoma. I'm out in Colorado Springs. And so it's provided us a lot more flexibility for finding very talented labor. And it comes at a cost, because now we're incorporated, well, not incorporated, but registered in multiple states. And there's a lot more paperwork to manage that way. But I think it was overall a good decision.
Okay, I think Brian kibitzed 2 of the last 3 minutes, so I'll just I'll pass him my last minute. He can go on from there.
Thank you, Bob, for all your hard work on our behalf and your way of delivering rather boring numbers and actually making them interesting, which is a rare talent. Next is the JAAVSO report, Nancy Morrison.
Thank you, and good morning. Good morning, everybody. Where do I point this? Okay, I think I hope everyone's familiar with the JAAVSO, but just in case not, here's a brief introduction. Some of that information has already been given. We cover a wide range of topics. Basically, if it's in the sky, an astronomical source, and if it varies in some property or other, we'll consider it for publication. That would include solar system objects such as asteroids and comets. Okay, here is the graph I show every year with an extension according to how our material is distributed by topic within that broad range. Eclipsing binaries are always a popular subject. I've lumped a number of classes of pulsating stars together in the green band. The yellow one is red giants and Miras. And there's a small but very devoted community publishing on that topic, including a paper, a talk that you heard yesterday from John Percy, who has 2 of those papers in press. That is in the editorial process. Exoplanets are big lately, and I've unfortunately had to lump a lot of really interesting stuff in among other. I'd like to give a more detailed breakdown of these topics in another forum sometime. Okay, I'm making progress toward, I should say, are making progress toward a couple of goals. One is to broaden the reach of the journal by increasing the number of stakeholders, including authors and referees. So I've given the number of authors that is distinct, unique authors this year as compared to last year. That number is up slightly. Incremental growth is what I really like. And I'm also steadily increasing the pool of people who do our peer review for us. Some of you are in the audience, and thank you very much. The second goal is to work with authors to try and execute improvements in quality where needed. It's not always needed. And particularly with students, when I took on this job, I agreed to provide help to students in writing papers, and I do that sometimes in great detail. I was further inspired by a session that was organized by the AAVSO in part from last January's American Astronomical Society meeting, which I attended virtually. This was a workshop on small ground and space telescopes. You can find details about this workshop on the AAVSO website, for which I've given the link. Oops, sorry about that. Do not press the reverse button when you want the laser pointer. Okay, so there's the link. Obviously, you can't click on it, but if you go to the AAVSO website and you search on the words that I've highlighted in red there, you can find it. And you may hear more about this later. Okay, and new this year, so who are our authors anyway? Amateurs, professionals, students. I've counted up the either the first author or the corresponding author of each paper. Most papers don't have corresponding authors listed, and usually I negotiate with the first author, but sometimes the first author is a student who has graduated or is otherwise no longer involved, and I work with the professor who advised that student. So here, do we learn from our mistakes? No. Okay. So how do I define amateur versus professional? First of all, a professional is somebody who gets paid to do astronomy in at least a small part. That can be an observatory astronomer or a university faculty member. And I judge those affiliations. I judge those statuses from the affiliation listed with the paper. And then students are the three colors on the right: high school, undergraduate, and graduate student. The numbers of high school students, interestingly, are the largest. Oh, except we have a large number of undergraduates 1 year. We have a very active high school teacher in California who produces a lot of papers, usually with a student as first author, although I think the teacher probably has a lot of input into what goes on. And my reason, by the way, for selecting the first author is that since I'm wanting to provide experience in writing papers for students, after all, that's a major part of becoming a scientist, I judge by the amount of interaction the author has with me and with the referees. Okay, well, I too have a short report. So I have to say thank you, first of all, to the AAVSO staff, Elizabeth, Mike, and Bert. Mike Saladiga is a volunteer who volunteers as our managing editor. And Elizabeth and Bert, you all know. Of course, the executive director and the board of directors for your support. Of course, without our authors and readers, we would not be anywhere. So I thank you all very much, and particularly the referees who do not get any, excuse me, do not get any public acknowledgement because they're supposed to be anonymous. Excuse me, just a second. But two referees I am unfortunately able to thank publicly because they are beyond any criticism. They were deceased since my last report. Robert Nelson, you've already heard about. Jay Pasikoff was a solar physicist, not an AAVSO member, somebody I have known since he and I were both students, who did pass away during the past year. Okay, any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Just curious, do we have any data on the number of citations of our journal articles in other publications?
I haven't, those data certainly exist. The numbers are small and I haven't gotten to it this year. I promise you that next year.
Nancy, are you able to go back to the previous slide on authorship?
I can certainly try.
Yes. There's a point to go back. I'm most personally concerned with the amateur category. And it seems there was a peak in 2021 for whatever reason. And then a rather obvious decline to the most recent year. Do you think personally that's an issue? How can we get the amateurs, I assume, sort of our membership, if you will. That's how I interpret that. Are there ways of improving that category as opposed to the professional and the student?
Well, thank you for reminding me why it is that I finished so quickly, because I meant to say something about the 2023 year in particular, which is a noticeably small number. That is incomplete. It is to date. I have 4 minutes left. Cool. I don't want to talk about this for 4 minutes. We actually have a lot of papers in the editorial pipeline. Our editorial team has been weighed down by various life issues, and work-life issues, particularly during the past summer. I think those issues have now been resolved, and so we should have a corresponding surge of papers in 2024. I know I know for a fact that there are at least 2 that will come out before the end of the year in the issue to be published. So that number will go up slightly.
Yeah, do you have an estimate of the number of papers that are actually put out by members versus non-members?
To my knowledge, nobody pays author charges, which means that every paper has at least one AAVSO member on the author list. Generally, the submitting author, who is not necessarily the corresponding author, is an AAVSO member. I have not compiled how many papers have more than one AAVSO member as authors. Is that the intent of your question? Yeah, okay.
Just to comment on 20 and 21, the bump, I suspect that some of that, at least some of that, is due to COVID. People were home, they had nothing to do. Let's do some variable star research and let's get at that backlog of data that I've had for 10 years. So I think that might have contributed.
Yeah, we observed that last year. As a matter of fact, there was a notable COVID spike. It's also interesting to note that papers really seem to come in bunches. There are times when people have lots of people at the same time have time to write papers. And so there are weeks will go by with nothing, and then 3 or 4 at the same time from completely independent people. Very interesting. I don't know whether this is Poisson statistics or not.
Thank you, Nancy. Always good work and an important part of our organization. I want to talk a little bit about our board. One of the big joys for me for the past 2 years have been the ability to work with a group of wonderful people. We did have our disagreements, and I consider that very healthy. But we were respectful to each other. We sought consensus, and I think we've gotten a lot done over the past 2 years. And so for this year's board members, I wonder if I get them to stand so that we could acknowledge them all. And thank you all. Just a little bylaws background. We did change the rules a little bit a few years ago, and to remind you, we now have 3 classes of board members, each serving for 3 years. So we have a cadre of 3 who rotate off the board every year, and 3 new board members that are elected every year, again, for 3-year terms. On occasion, we do have someone for personal reasons who has to step down from the board. And so we occasionally have to appoint someone to fill in for the remainder of a term. We have a nominating committee that works developing a slate of candidates for each year's board elections. And I want to thank Joyce Cusick and her team for leading the nominating committee this year. And so, as they say in the Academy Awards, Elizabeth, may I have the envelope, please? I was hoping you weren't going to come up sooner, so I could ask you to do that. Great. All right, I want to thank everyone who was willing to put their name forward. There are no losers, obviously. Our 3 new board members, and I would ask them to come forward so we can get their picture, is Walt Cooney, Mark Munkasey, where is Mark? And Matt Craig. I don't know where. He was here yesterday. Oh, well. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Rest assured, you will not sit idle for long. We will be soon contacting you for our onboarding process. And by all means, any questions, comments, we are always available to get you on board. And once we've got you on board, we're going to really put you to work. So thanks again for participating. All right. Next is Brian, who's going to give the membership and directors reports.
I get the lovely 40-minute block here near the end of the membership meeting. So I'll try to keep it exciting as much as I can. As usual, my membership report will consist of the following topics. I'll first discuss the board, staff, contractors, and volunteers, a variety of trends that exist within our various databases, as well as our membership. Just a reminder of what our goals and objectives were for 2022 and where we're at in terms of achieving those.
some opportunities that I see, as well as plans for this next fiscal year. So first off, with board staff, contractors, and volunteers. Our officers this last year were David Cowell, who was serving as president, Richard Berry, who was first vice president, Sarah Ostrin Willis, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but she was our second vice president, and she was also serving as our ombuds. Chris Larson, who has been serving as secretary, Bob Stevens, who is treasurer, and then me also as the executive director. I will note that Dave Cowell has reached the end of his term, and so this is his last official board meeting that he will be presiding over. So let's go ahead and give Dave a quick round of applause. And Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure working with you over the last year. In terms of our board members, Antonella Nota, Bob Buckheim, and Ken Hudson are the current class that is going to be rolling off the board this year. So they've all reached the end of their term limits. Martina Arndt, Dennis Conti, and Tom Macarone are the next class that's coming up. As David alluded to, occasionally we do have members that leave the board for other reasons other than their term limit. Martina has indicated that she's going to be stepping down from the board, and pursuant to our bylaws, we will be appointing a replacement for her soon. And then last year's board members that were elected were Pat Boyce, Arnie Hendon, and Peter Belo. So I'd like to all give these folks a round of applause as well. They've spent a lot of time working with me and doing good things.
Actually, if I can make a slight correction, Antonella was appointed to fill in the end of a term. So she actually is at the end of her.
Oh, yeah, Antonella. Yeah, yep. Yeah. So the first three are reaching the end of their term limits, and then Martina is resigning 1 year early. Next up, in terms of staff, me serving as the executive director, I'm remote out of Colorado Springs. Of course, we all know Kathy, Elizabeth, and Bert, who are all here in the room with us today. Lauren Harrington switched over from being a contractor to a half-time employee with the AAVSO this year. And then we also brought on 2 additional new members to our teams. Aru Boop, who you saw modeling the t-shirt in the slides there. If he doesn't make it as a software developer, he'll definitely make it as a model. And then Tim Leister, who is our new marketing and communications coordinator. So if we could all give the staff a round of applause as well. And then contractors who are remote. So Nancy Morrison provides services related to administering our Spanish webinars grant. And so she works about 0.1 FTE. And then Sebastian Otero, who many of you have known for multiple years, he's effectively 1 FTE working remote from down in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And so we're very fortunate to have their support as well. So if we could give them a round of applause. And then, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about all of our volunteers. So the AAVSO has continued to have approximately 200 volunteers in total. That is unfortunately a little bit too much for me to list off here at the podium today. However, I will note that everybody who volunteers for the AAVSO, your name gets noted in our annual report that we produce. And we truly value your support and engagement with the AAVSO. It's been a great experience working with many of you over the last year, and I really appreciate your support. So one more round of applause for the volunteers. All right. Okay, so some trends in terms of different things that have occurred over the last couple of years. So first of which is what does our membership actually look like? And so this is a plot of the last 10 years worth of membership data. The general trend that we can see is that there's been an upward trend and kind of linear growth starting around 2015 when Dr. Kafka launched a significant campaign to grow our membership. And we've continued to grow at a linear rate since then. There's a little bit of oddness happening in 2022 and 2023. I think the discrepancy that happens there is our membership database is relatively antiquated, and I think there's an error in the query. And so I think there's a little bit of double counting in 2023 and undercounting in 2022 that's occurring there. So our membership levels, I would say, are somewhere around 1,400. I know that we have 1,200 paying members according to Bob's latest treasurer report. So in the next year, we're intending on replacing our membership database. And so hopefully we can resolve this kind of ongoing issue that we've had having a precise number of members that we can account for. On the right-hand side, this is the number of active observers that we had over the last 10 years as well. Defining an active observer as a person that has submitted at least one data point to the AAVSO within the last fiscal year. As you might expect, you can see that it's a fairly flat trend of about somewhere between 800 to 1,000 observers in a given year. I will note that this doesn't count the solar observers. Sorry, Chris, don't throw anything at me. But I did check. There's approximately, I think it's 50 people that are part of the solar section. 30? 70. Okay, 70. Okay. Yeah, 70, 75. Okay, but I did include a report about solar observations this time around. She razzed me pretty bad over that last year. Just as I reported last year, the AAVSO's membership numbers are relatively healthy. We're keeping a strong number of observers. A lot of people are engaged. And so I think our organization is healthy and it's growing. One comment that we've discussed in the past is that there's approximately 200 people that leave the AAVSO in a given year, and there's approximately 200 people that come back into the AAVSO every single year, with a little bit more people coming than going, to explain the growth that we're seeing here. Over the last year, I've been asking questions of different local astronomy clubs, trying to figure out, how much of the astronomy market is the AAVSO capturing, and how are our membership levels changing relative to larger astronomy clubs within the United States. And I began this because I asked my local astronomy club in Colorado Springs, what are your membership numbers? And, looked at the two, and they were actually correlated. And there's no reason why that should happen, just picking a club at random to see a kind of a growth in astronomy. So the overall trend is there are more people becoming interested in astronomy. And my current estimate is that we capture about 1% of people who are willing to contribute money towards astronomy in some way. So like if they purchase a magazine, or if they buy a telescope, or if they're a member of a club. This is going to be a continuing effort of mine to kind of dig into the overall membership statistics to get an idea about the health of amateur astronomy within the United States over the next year or so. I don't know if I'll actually generate a report. Some of the information was provided to me in confidence, and in other cases it was just openly given. But we're capturing approximately 1% is my current best guess. And that's not actually a bad number, right? You think about the number of people that go off and complete PhDs compared to those people that study in astronomy in college. I bet it's probably a fairly similar ratio. For choice courses, we've continued to offer somewhere between 8 to 10 choice courses over the last decade. This last year, we offered 2 fewer choice courses than what we normally do. The reason for that is that the individuals that normally present that material just were a little bit too busy to present it. And if you look on the right-hand side in terms of the actual participants, you'll notice that there is a drop from approximately 125 down to about 100 people. That drop is entirely consistent with offering 2 fewer choice courses. So the number of people per choice course is remaining more or less constant. So a good indication that we're still having the same impact for our educational material. For webinars, as you might recall, we started our webinar series kind of in the height of COVID back in 2020. And we can see our total number of webinars that we've offered. They're down slightly from about, I think it was 34 down to approximately 26 that we offered this last year, where we've adopted a schedule where we offer 1 webinar in English every month, 1 webinar in Spanish, and then we had a couple of additional special webinars. That seems to be a reasonable amount of time to invest from the staffing perspective. In terms of the number of people that we have reached, we've seen a kind of a linear trend of, in blue here on the right-hand side, the number of people attending in person has decreased in total, but the number of YouTube views is kind of all over the place. There was a pretty big bump due to COVID in terms of people attending online in 2020. So we're having an incredibly strong YouTube reach, but not as many people attending in person. And so we see a lot of repeat attenders at our meetings, and so at the live events. And I think I can speak for both myself and for Lauren and for Sebastian, who hosts the Spanish webinar. We really would like to see more people attending these things. I think that's kind of what I wanted to say on this slide. It's averaging about 2 webinars per month with about 100 people in live and about 250 people watching the subsequent YouTube views. Just for kind of rough numbers, 100 people is about 10% of the AAVSO's membership at any given point in time. So most of those people are AAVSO members that are attending as well.
The databases, AID and VSX, AID, as mentioned a little bit earlier, is continuing to grow. So last year we were at about 53 million. Now we're up at about 59 million observations that were made by you and submitted to the AAVSO's database. So it's continuing to grow somewhat exponentially there. For VSX, there was a pretty large jump. I can't read the number down here at such an oblique angle. I think that was 2021, 2020, something like that. This is when the Gaia data release occurred. And so Gaia DR1, DR2, and DR3 led to this increase of from about 100,000, I think, to, sorry, up to 2 million or so entries that are up at the top. So we still maintain the world's largest database on variable stars of about 2.2 million entries. Last year, I did a study to see how professional astronomers were using our data, and VSX accounts for 26% of our citations in scientific journals. And so it definitely is having a fairly significant impact. For AVSpec and the exoplanets database, we started the AVSpec database kind of in 2017, and it's continued to grow, but I'd say it's kind of in a linear growth rate at this point in time. So we were continuing to receive a lot of different spectra. While Lauren was away at PARI during the summer, Bert and I were reviewing every single spectra that came in, and at one point we had 310 spectra just appear out of nowhere, and that kept us kind of backlogged for a while. But that's a very interesting database. There were star types that I didn't even know they existed. And so there's a lot of people that are out there observing really interesting objects and submitting the data to our database. The exoplanet database has also continued to increase. It's gone into kind of an exponential increase. Speaking with Bert and our colleagues at Exoplanet Watch, we anticipate that this is probably going to curl over a little bit. There's a significant backlog of data at Exoplanet Watch right now, which we believe is driving a large amount of that increase. And so we should kind of see it level off and reach a steady state growth area in the next year. And then lastly, for Chris, the solar database, we had kind of, this is interesting. This goes back to its inception back, around 1923 or so. And you can see a pretty linear trend, and then it's maintained a much steeper linear trend in terms of the number of observations that are being submitted to the database. I think we're at about 250,000 solar observations to date. Observing campaigns are another one of the AAVSO's primary products that it produces. This is the history of all of our observing campaigns going back to the 1970s. I pulled out the paper records in order to generate this report as well. So it shows you how things have changed over the last several of decades. We had a fairly large explosion in terms of observations. I'm having the same problem with the laser button as what Nancy did there. Having a fairly large number of space-based campaigns that happened here in the early 2000s, which explains why there were about 80 campaigns that were occurring there. That's support for, I guess IUE was already done by then, but, Hubble Space Telescope, things along that lines. We've continued to see approximately somewhere around 35 to 40 observing campaigns that were being conducted with the AAVSO per any given month, any given year. A couple of exciting things that we can talk about here is you probably all saw the recent launch of the Supernova Early Warning System, or SNOOS campaign. There's 192 different bright stars that are being observed as part of that campaign. That was a really heroic effort for our charts team, and as well as Bert and George, to arrange that project and get it up and running. It took multiple years to get it going, but it's finally up and launched. It revealed some issues with our internal processes, like generating 192 sequences over the course of a month or a few months even. That's a lot of work to do, but that got done. In addition to that, we also launched an engagement with Chara, and I think Gail might allude to that maybe tomorrow during her talk. Out of that, our first round of proposals that we engaged with Chara, we had 5 PIs that checked the box that said we would like to have AAVSO data, and out of that we've had one campaign that's already started, that's on Sigma Gem, another campaign that's to be announced, and then independent of that, I was approached by another one of Chara's PIs to begin an effort on the Armada collaboration, which is a non-traditional program. So most of the time AAVSO is looking at variable stars. This one instead is looking at closely spaced binaries, and the issue is that they weren't sure with the catalog photometric data whether the stars were together or like resolved or unresolved. And so they needed accurate photometry where they could tell if it was, one star or 2 stars in the images in order to calibrate their data. And so that's 75 objects.
For that campaign, I tapped 2 of AAVSO's members, so you didn't see anything get published here, but Ken Menzies and Tom Calderwood kindly agreed to help with that effort. And so I think this is a good indication that there are observational tasks that professional astronomers would be interested in us having us help with that don't fit into the normal variable star regime, but going from working on variable stars to working on these stars, which are mostly non-variable, it revealed some issues with our processes and our ability to scale as well. So it was a good learning experience, and hopefully it's Ken's enjoying it thus far. Shoulder shrugs, maybe. So it was a lot of work in order to launch that campaign as well. Publications with AAVSO in full text. There's a lot of different ways that you can search through, but this is just a quick query to ADS. You can see over the last several years, we've had a fairly consistent number of publications that were citing AAVSO's data, product, or services, kind of at around the 250 per year in terms of, in blue, our peer-reviewed publications, and orange, our non-peer-reviewed publications. As usual, this is per calendar year, and so 2023, it appears down a little bit because we haven't completed a full fiscal year at this point. But I expect it'll probably pack up. So, 250 papers per year is actually really quite respectable. I once looked to see how many papers cite Hubble per year, and I think it's like 93, 94 per year. And I'm not going to say that we're doing much better than Hubble here, but it's a nice bragging right as long as you leave out the details. Okay, another thing that I'd like to make an announcement about is our second vice president currently is Sarah Ostrom-Willis. She's been putting together an ombuds role within the AAVSO. In case you've never been in an organization that has this is a special role that provides a means for the staff or the members to discuss anything that needs to be considered confidential or involves a third party. These are actually really quite useful. The only request is that it shouldn't be anything that's technical in nature. So if you have any complaints about the organization and you don't want to complain directly to the staff, this is a way that you can talk about the AAVSO to a third party that will be neutral. So if you would like to email, normally I would say, Sarah, go ahead and stand up and raise your hand and say hello, but she's not here today. And so the email address that we set up is ombuds@aavso.org. So just ombuds@aavso.org. So Sarah has that role for less than 24 hours, and then starting tomorrow, Dennis Conti will assume that role. Okay, so that's the first portion of my the members report. So I'll pause here for questions. And Dave, how am I doing on time? Okay, terrific. Are there any questions about the membership report? No questions. Okay, anything online, Sarah?
No.
Okay. Wow, I guess we should do meetings on day when daylight savings time occurs. It keeps everybody a little bit more tame. Okay, next up is the executive director's report. Hello again, I'm Dr. Brian Kloppenberg. I'm the executive director. Nice to see you. So just to recap my report last year, it was my first year coming into the AAVSO. Actually, I think I was about a month and a half, 2 months, Kathy, between when I was hired and when I came up here to the podium for the first time. So, kind of the new and exciting thing was, hey, there's a new executive director here. I reported on some findings from my 30, 60, 90-day plan. This is a thing that many executives within business use to come in and learn about the organization and find problems and start implementing changes within them. Some common themes, some common concerns that were expressed is there was a perception that our data quality could be improved, concerns that AAVSO was becoming less relevant over time. There was a lot of concerns that it was just too difficult to get started in variable star astronomy. And I think you would all agree that, there's a lot of learning to do in order to get involved and start doing variable star observations. There was also some concerns that AAVSO's rate of growth was too slow, or it wasn't, it was too slow, too low, or generically that we weren't promoting ourselves enough to let amateur astronomers know a little bit more about our organization and get people to come in and join us. And then also some concerns that we had relatively low collaboration with collaboration with our sister organizations. And I'm going to report on each one of these topics in a little bit more detail. So first off, actions that we took concerning your data quality concerns. As we heard yesterday, we formed this data quality task force, and they produced a report after about 3 months of investigating the issue. They had 5 primary recommendations that were coming out of here, and just kind of give you an idea of what we're going to do to act on those recommendations is here on the slide. So first off, in terms of metrics and monitoring, we're going to implement the metrics that were suggested by the Data Quality Task Force. We can't quite determine where we're going to sequence that in, but I'm going to try to slide that into sometime during fiscal year 2024. As you'll learn here in a few more slides, we have a lot of technical improvement activities that AAVSO is going to be working on over the beginning of this year, and those need to get done before we circle back to answer these data metrics questions. Their second recommendation concerned quality checks about submission. We're going to be replacing the data upload tool. So this is WebObs, and we intend on doing that relatively early within fiscal year 2024. And that will just be kind of a minimally viable product at that point in terms of the data upload tool. It'll have very similar functionality to what there is today, but then we'll circle back kind of near the end of 2024, beginning of calendar fiscal year 2025 to add some additional data quality checks, for example, against a mean light curve or something like that. To improve observer knowledge, Arnie Hendon has kindly volunteered to offer a choice course to teach best practices, and you never turn a person down if they volunteer. And so Arnie, thank you for being willing to make that effort. I think I might also form a committee to just kind of explore what we believe we need to do in terms of improving observer knowledge, and that might guide us in terms of additional course material that we will offer, although I left it off the slide here because I don't want to make a commitment and not follow through on it. Next up is their recommendation was quality over quantity, or Matt, you used a different phrase yesterday. I forget exactly what it was. Quality and quantity. So I'm going with the words that were in press. I think this could be an incredibly touchy topic, right? The way that AAVSO's award structures are generated, it's around the number of observations, right? And then figuring out how to modify that program such that it focuses on quality, which is kind of an ill-defined term to begin with, could be somewhat difficult. Now, the committee did spend a significant amount of time discussing this topic, so we have a lot of ideas, but I'd like to form another committee just to evaluate our existing award structure and then see what changes they might recommend in terms of implementing it. The last thing that I want to do is tell somebody that, your 100,000th observation to AAVSO is not worth anything anymore, right? That's just plain insulting. But we'll probably introduce some additional awards, like Matt gave an example yesterday of if you fill out all of the records for like your air mass, your observing time, your observing location within an AEFF, right? That counts as a gold star. And if you don't do it, then it doesn't count as a gold star. So that's one example of something that we could do to extend our existing award structure to encourage the quality of data to improve. And lastly, to improve the packaging of data for researchers, we also had a fairly large discussion about this in the Data Quality Task Force, and we're going to be rewriting our data download tool to not only package the data with some additional informations. For example, when I did my report looking at the publications that we had in the last year, approximately 70% of researchers were citing the AAVSO correctly, but that means 30% of the researchers were not citing AAVSO correctly. And so we're going to repackage the data so that it comes with a acknowledgements.txt file that makes it really clear exactly how you're supposed to be acknowledging AAVSO's data. So a relatively simple thing, but we're going to be rewriting the data download tool sometime in fiscal year 2024. Now, concerning the other topics, I'm going to discuss the items in bold in a lot more detail, so I'll just quickly read them and we'll come back to them here in a moment. The other items that we talked about doing were establishing our place in modern astronomy, building stronger ties with researchers and reducing the barrier to getting involved in variable star research. More detail on those on the next couple of slides, but the 3 bottom bullets are a couple of the other items that were expressed as concerns to me during my 30, 60, 90-day plan. The first of which was attracting attention to promote our work by creating new advertising, new projects, and being more social. So this just is kind of towards the promotional aspect of AAVSO and attempting to make it grow.
One thing that we have done is we have completely changed our marketing strategy. It used to be that we were putting ads in print. So you saw us in Sky and Telescope as a paid ad, kind of someplace within their document, Astronomy Technology Today, or Astronomy Magazine. Instead, we're focusing on generating new and organic content. And Tim Leister here, who has a background in astronomy, so he's not just kind of a normal marketing and communications guy. He's a marketing communications person with experience in astronomy, which I can tell you that's quite hard to find. He's going to be writing one blog post per month as well that promotes things that are happening within the AAVSO, articles that you've published, research that you've done, just kind of tooting our own horn in that way, as well as posting to social media at least once per week on each one of our major channels. So we'll try this for a year and see how it works. And if we see no results, we didn't really see a strong correlation between placing an ad in Sky and Tel or any of the other major advertisers and like a significant spike in our website traffic, for example. So we'll try this for a year and see how it works and then reevaluate the situation. Next item here was to grow our membership through focused recruitment, diversity initiatives, and international relationships. This last year, we presented a wide variety of talks. We had board members that presented at NEAF and NEAC. I went down to the Astronomical League's convention, which is down in Louisiana. And then we presented at a multitude of different astronomy clubs. I gave talks at least 10 astronomy clubs, not in person, usually online, over the last year. And we had fewer than 5 members join the AAVSO as a result of those efforts. And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, yeah, this is good for us to promote. These are probably things that we should do, but it's not going to achieve our objectives in terms of bringing in new members. And so I think that there probably are different ways that we could try it, right? Hearing me talk about the AAVSO and say how good it is one thing. Hearing you talk about your own local astronomy club and be passionate about the AAVSO is a completely different thing, and it's much more powerful. And so I would like to change the way that we're promoting, and giving talks to local astronomy clubs. And so we'll have more about that coming out later this year. And then the next bullet point down there, I also mentioned that I compared our membership levels with other clubs and found a kind of interesting correlation, but the analysis there is yet to be complete. And finally, we talked about collaborating more with sister organizations. And as a good executive director should do, I reached out and talked with my counterparts at a variety of different organizations. And I can say that they're all still happy with the AAVSO. They'd like to do something with the AAVSO, but we can't quite figure out what we want to do. So we're still kind of talking. There's lots of ideas going back and forth, but no firm actions at the present time. Concerning the upper topics there, we'll just walk through them kind of one at a time. So first off, establishing our place in modern astronomy. This was a significant thrust during this last fiscal year. And I kind of would just like to summarize the kind of the state of affairs effectively. So in the last decade, there have been a lot of changes in astronomy, right? Robotic telescopes have become inexpensive and ubiquitous. Sky surveys, they're plentiful, the quantities of data that's being produced by them. There's a very high internal degree of consistency because it's usually one instrument or maybe a small number of instruments that are all identical. They're being reduced by identical means using the same calibration database, which is not kind of like AAVSO, right? We're a very heterogeneous group. And then the sky survey data is also very easily discovered and used. There's also been a fairly significant shift over the last decade in terms of the way that astronomers are approaching astronomy. And that's a change from just adding in data science and machine learning techniques. So when I got my PhD, people were still studying single objects in detail. Now, a lot of astronomers are using data science and machine learning to make inferences about thousands of objects all in one time. And so this is really kind of setting us up for a real generational shift within astronomy. Now, in the next decade, we're going to see more surveys from ground-based telescopes, the Vera Rubin Observatory, as well as the Argus Array and ZTF-2 potentially coming along. They're going to keep plugging along, as well as surveys from space telescopes, including the James Webb, the Roman Space Telescope, ESA Plato, and the Habitable Worlds Observatory. And so we were left with the question of, where do amateur astronomers fit into this world? I'd like to dig into just a little bit more detail about a couple of these sky surveys that are coming up over the next decade.
The Varun Observatory and LSST, right? It's an 8.4 meter telescope. And I think it was Paula mentioned this yesterday, right? So it's a very interesting instrument. It's going to be producing terabytes worth of data that's just going to be streaming down the pipe. It's going to be a huge game changer to how modern astronomers are focusing on things. I believe when we talked with LSST, they said there's going to be about 100,000 alerts per night on transient events. And the comment there was, we professional astronomers can't follow up on all of this. And so we're going to need amateur astronomers' help there. There's also this really interesting device called the Argus Array, and it's going to consist of 800 co-mounted 8-inch delta row telescopes. It's kind of unlike a bassinet that swings back and forth. This thing will have an instantaneous field of regard of 120 degrees and observe stars that are anywhere from relatively bright, depending on if it's tracking with the stars or ratcheting back. But most of their observations are going to be kind of in the 16th to 19th magnitude range. They're also going to have a single slit in the roof that's going to consist of an approximately 2 meter wide Sloan G filter. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to see them build. In terms of the next generation of space telescopes, and I put, next is kind of current generation in terms of the James Webb Space Telescope. We see that it's observing all the way from optical out into the mid-wavelength infrared, kind of covering K ranges from 14th to 29th magnitude. The next generation space telescope, Roman, it's going to be observing at visible wavelengths and covering things from 15th to 28th with relatively low spectral resolution. An expected launch date coming up in 2027. It's going to be relatively difficult for us to really collaborate a whole lot with these telescopes. There will certainly be studies, I think, that we'll be able to contribute to and help with, but it's unlikely that we'll really be able to get a high level of engagement with a large number of programs from either one of these two telescopes. Now, that's to be contrasted with the items on the right. So the European Space Agency is developing this Plato telescope, and it consists of 24, and in their description, they call them normal cameras. These things are observing stars that are from 8th to 16th magnitude, and then there's 8 of these fast telescopes that are going to be used mostly to lock the telescope onto the star and assist with tracking. Those are looking at stars that are in the 4th to 8th range. This is a really great thing for us to collaborate with because they're looking at bright stars. We look at bright stars, and it's launching relatively soon. The main need that I see coming from Plato is that they're going to need ground-based radial velocity data for some of their studies. In some instances, we'll be able to assist with that. In other instances, we won't be able to assist with that. So study of stellar atmospheres, I think we'll be able to, be able to collect radial velocity data that allows us to study those, but looking for like exoplanet transits, that's currently beyond the means of most amateur astronomers. And the one program I'm really excited about is the NASA Habitable Worlds Observatory. It's going to be observing bright stars. And when I say bright, I mean Rigel's on the list. And so this satellite is going to be launching in 2040. And that gives us plenty of time to start observing these stars ourselves, to get engaged with the Habitable Worlds Observatory Program Office and convince them that amateur astronomers are going to be able to contribute to their research in significant ways. I've already reached out to the PIs, the program scientists at NASA on the Habitable Worlds Observatory. I have their initial target list of approximately 150 stars. And in the next year, I hope to launch an internally ran AAVSO program to start observing those stars in greater detail. Now, keep in mind, this thing doesn't launch until 2040, and so we may not see AAVSO papers citing our work until maybe 2045. And so this might be beyond my tenure as an executive director, but this is a place where amateur astronomers can make an absolutely huge impact to characterize the long-term characteristics of these bright stars. I learned all of this in advance of going to the AAS workshop, which we put on, which I might add was enabled by the support of members like you donating to the Director's Discretionary Fund. What I did there was I brought together a variety of people, professional sky surveys, educators, as well as amateur astronomers, and we just effectively hashed out all of these problems to try to figure out where we were going to attempt to collaborate. So you can see here all of the different folks that were represented, including all of the major sky surveys here, robotic telescope farms. Bob Buckheim was a proxy for all amateur astronomers. Space missions, telescope manufacturers, including plane wave and sidereal technologies, as well as 8 different educators. Here's a good group photo. So, a really good 2-day meeting that we had there. What we learned here is that we can compare the current generation photometric sky surveys with amateur astronomer capabilities. So on the left-hand side, this is the visual magnitude range versus on the horizontal axis. This is the different sky survey, if you will, that can observe in different regions. The color bars indicate if there's 2 filters, 3 to 6 filters, or 6 different photometric filters that are being used. Amateur astronomers can kind of catch anywhere between 4th magnitude down to about 19th magnitude relatively easily. Most of the other sky surveys, they're kind of sitting here around, they begin at about 13th, 14th magnitude, and they're really catching, the vast majority of stars, which are relatively faint, sitting down there at kind of like 21st, 22nd magnitude. So I would say anything that kind of sits up here in terms of stuff that's about 10th magnitude or brighter, that's fair game for amateur astronomers. And it's unlikely that professional sky surveys are going to spend a lot of time observing them. So there's a clear area of science. Like if you want to do science, define your own hypothesis, conduct an experiment, and publish results. Those are great stars to look at. And as we learned from Joyce Guzik yesterday, Deneb is really bright star. Everybody knows where it's at in the sky, and it had very little actual research done on it. So there's a very rife area that we can start to work on there. So I would also say that, if you want to collaborate with sky surveys, the other nice thing is there's a good overlap between the upper end of most sky surveys and the fainter end of what amateur astronomers are capable of doing. So we should be able to produce, relatively complementary science, especially with most of these sky surveys only observing in a single photometric filter. In terms of spectroscopy, here's a fairly similar summary here. On the left-hand side of this bar, these are amateur astronomer capabilities. In the top graph, that's the wavelength range versus the different survey counting amateurs on the left here for the first 4 columns. And then on the bottom, it's the limiting magnitude versus, again, the different sky surveys, and they jive between the top and the bottom plots. You can see here that amateur astronomers, they have fairly good wavelength coverage that's complementary to what professional sky surveys in terms of spectroscopy are doing. But in terms of brightness, amateur astronomers, again, kind of rule the bright stars, and these professional sky surveys, they really focus on the fainter end of things. So there's another good place that shows that, we're able to produce data that's unique and useful to bright stars. There may be a little bit less of an opportunity for amateur astronomers to follow up on spectroscopy here. So the conclusions coming out of this is where sky surveys and small telescopes really excel. So small ground-based telescopes were really good at bright objects, studying single objects in detail, responding to transient events, doing multicolor photometry. As Bob mentioned, what was the phrase, Bob Buckheim? It was, you squander our observing time on single objects, right? That's something that professional astronomers would never do, is just to sit on a single star for a long period of time. And that also goes with relatively high-risk science. There are things that, because we can squander our observing time, to quote Bob, we can do things that professional astronomers would not risk their careers to do, just simply because it's too risky for them to take on. There's also what I call routine but necessary science. We have a large number of stars within VSX that there is some catalog value of what we think the variability type is, but it's never actually been confirmed beyond the original discovery paper. And so this type of catalog maintenance, it may not be an incredibly exciting thing to do, but it's actually a necessary thing to do, because after all, 26% of the citations back to the AAVSO deal with VSX. And so if we can make VSX better, professional astronomers will use it even more. So if you're interested in doing, routine but necessary science, please reach out to me. And then for small space telescopes, Russ Janae was also on the organizing committee, so space telescopes slipped in there as well. You can see that, these things might be able to do UV and near infrared spectroscopy and provide some additional persistent coverage. And sky surveys really are good at looking at a large number of objects and faint objects, and et cetera. So the suggestions on how to proceed is that small telescopes should maintain and build our knowledge of bright objects. So really focus on those things that are kind of brighter than 14th, 12th magnitude, and understand those stars and study them in greater detail. Small telescopes could follow up on transient events and conduct contemporaneous observations to sky surveys. And when we mean contemporaneous, at the same time, but using multicolor photometry or spectroscopy. Bob Buckheim gave a great example of how his work and Ken's work produced a really great combination of science on a flare star, for example. But in the end, the conclusion was here's make sure you submit your data to some place where it can be discovered. Keeping your data on your hard drive doesn't help the scientific community at all. A couple of issues that we have is that the surveys, they need to figure out some way to motivate observers on why people should care about observing these objects. A lot of professional astronomers, they really treat these alert notices as, these event generations coming out of sky surveys as hey, you should go observe this thing. But if a computer tells you to go do something, are you actually going to do it? Right? The odds are probably no, right? You want to have some form of motivation. You need to know why this object is significant. And so we'll be working with professional astronomers to try to ferret out, what's really new and exciting about these different objects. It might slow down the rate of response, but it might also make for a more rewarding experience for AAVSO members. There's also an issue of that there's just too many alerts. As I mentioned, LSST is expecting to generate 100,000 objects per night. We need some way to filter that down based upon your observing capabilities. We haven't yet come up with the precise technical way that we can do that, but you can imagine that if we know where you're located, where your telescope is, what your camera is, we can use that information to filter it out to objects that you can't observe. We can get rid of those relatively quickly. And if you express your preferences of things that you're interested in, we can filter it down even further. So a fairly easy technical solution, but something that we just haven't explored to date. Next up on this topic is building ties with researchers. As I mentioned, during this last year, we started a collaboration directly with CHARA. We're working with the CHARA internal consortium. So CHARA has internal telescope time as well as externally facing telescope time. The internal collaboration I would describe as fairly risky, like they're risk takers. That's the way to put it, right? They're doing science that would be relatively difficult. And if things don't work out, they're okay with it. And so that was kind of like an ideal way to engage with this group to start with. To announce that, I attended the CHARA consortium meeting, and then when we got those 5 proposals in that checked the Get AAVSO data box, Elizabeth and I both reached out to them in order to get them to engage. So out of the 5 people that engaged, we had 2 PIs that actually started observing campaigns and 1 PI that came from an external source. That was the Armada effort that I briefed a little bit ago. We learned a lot of things in this. The first of which is that kind of the focus on variable stars kind of limited our appeal, at least with CHARA, right? They're studying things that are not variable stars. And so if we want to broaden our horizons a little bit and engage a little bit more with other research consortiums, we might want to think about offering additional services. So in the case of like the Armada collaboration, Tom and Ken were out getting photometry on just regular stars, right? And it's a very useful thing to do. But doing so would mean a fairly large change in how our organization operates. And I don't know as members if you'd want to do that, right? So I'm not going to pull the lever on that one yet. We also learned that AAVSO's own processes don't scale very well to 50+ objects. As you can imagine, generating charts, as I mentioned, like with the snooze program, generating charts on 194 different objects, that took a long period of time, and we couldn't instantly respond to their request. So there's some things that we need to look at inside of the AAVSO to figure out if we start offering services like this to more observatories, how are we going to deal with a flood of incoming requests? So this was a very useful experiment to undertake. We also don't have any explicit method to recruit observers and determine if they're going to observe a particular object. We don't really need 50 people looking at a single star. We need kind of like 3 to 5 people working at a star to ensure that it's adequately covered. And if nobody's looking at it, that's a problem because we made a commitment to the professionals that we were going to go observe it, and we don't have a way to track that internally. And lastly, we don't have any methods that exist to train observers in these non-traditional programs, things that are outside of the variable star world. And Ken, Tom, and I think it took us about a month and a half to figure out how to fully define that Armada program. And so it was a yet another good learning experience. So I think before we branch out and we start trying to get our name on additional proposal forms out there, like NOIR Labs, that's the ground-based observatory consortium here in the United States for professional astronomers, I think we should need to solve these problems before we try to reach out, because the worst thing to do is to say somebody, here is something that we can do, we can provide to you, and then fall flat on your face. I thank Gail and Chara for letting us try it out this year. I think we're going to work through and get all of our commitments done. And it should be better next year. Another one of your concerns was reducing the barrier to variable star astronomy. We started asking questions about what's actually needed and how do people get involved within variable star astronomy to start off with. And so for visual astronomers, you really, to get started in the AAVSO, there's a lot of prerequisites, right? You have to know how to read a star chart. You have to know how to operate your telescopes or point your binoculars or hold them steady. And there's a lot of stuff that exists before you can even start making your first variable star observation. And then, just submitting data, right? There's a little bit of a learning curve to submit data to the AAVSO. Extending that same concept of what do you need to do, what do you need to learn to get involved with CCD, CMOS, or DSLR photometry? A lot of the same things, except for now you need to know how to do aperture photometry, data calibration, and data submission. And smart telescopes, we don't really have any existing method to engage with them. A few AAVSO members have experimented with them, but AAVSO has no formal recommendations for how to use those devices in astronomy or variable star astronomy. But I can say that right now we're working with 2 different vendors trying out their devices, developing material and recommendations back to them about how they can improve their product, as well as some formal training material to teach people how to use smart telescopes in variable star astronomy. And I actually had a really good conversation with Frank yesterday. We have a good idea of how we might engage between AAVSO and Unistellar, for example. So our idea that we have right now for digital observers, I'm not intentionally ignoring visual observers, but just focusing on digital for the moment, mostly with a smart telescope slant to these following comments, is I think we might need to create a new database that accepts instrumental magnitudes for all the stars in the images, and then take these instrumental magnitudes and calibrate them on AAVSO servers. So do the astrometric plate solution in one of the 2 places, find our calibration stars, apply a uniform calibration technique that accounts for air mass correction, color correction, your location, whether or not something is observable. That way we have a fairly uniform data reduction pipeline. Now, that's not to say that we're going to get rid of the traditional way that we've been doing things, but I think this is probably one of our best methods to be able to engage with the smart telescope market, which admittedly is very different than our own organization, right? These people, they have devices like the Unistellar telescopes that we've seen sitting out front. They want to take them out. They want to get some images and contribute to science relatively quickly. So this year's focus areas are going to be a continuing effort to find our place in modern astronomy. We're going to continue to build additional ties with professional observatories and attempt to reduce our barrier to getting involved with variable star research, mostly focusing on smart telescopes. We're also going to be making a variety of infrastructure improvements. So first off is we're going to be rolling out a new single sign-on authentication system, which will allow you to log into the AAVSO's website in one place and navigate to the AAVSO's other websites and still be logged in between them. We're going to be deploying some new forum software in the next year, which I think will make everybody happy because the forum software is quite abysmal right now, as well as migrating our website from its existing Drupal instance over to a software as a service, third-party hosted WordPress instance instead. And as part of that, we're going to be replacing the data download tool, the WebObs data upload tool. And I will caution that right now we have about 60,000 web pages on the AAVSO's website between user-generated, like staff-generated content and forum-generated content. I will tell you that we will not be taking all 60,000 pages forward. We've already gone through the pages to try to make some decisions about what content should be brought forward based upon usage statistics. And then when we actually go to make that transition, we will keep all of the older pages around in case we need to go back and pull them in. So if there's some resource that you use at AAVSO's website frequently, please write to us and let us know that these are things that you should preserve. Otherwise, there might be a chance that it just may not come with it. But 60,000 pages is a little much to move from one website to another. So how can you help? I would just say let's continue to talk to the AAVSO and to your local and regional astronomy clubs. Coordinate with the staff on writing articles. And whenever I see an article in the Reflector that talks about AAVSO, Sky and Telescope Astronomy Magazine, I always send these people a personalized thank you note just to say thank you for writing about the AAVSO and publicizing our work. I would encourage you as the members of the AAVSO to write those articles and submit them to Sky and Tel, because in my 30, 60 day 90 plan, the thing that I learned is that most people got involved with the AAVSO because they read about it, or they learned about it, or they saw it in a video or something like that. They got excited about that rather than through just, here's an ad in an article, for example. Try to volunteer to help our committees, section leaders, and staff achieve their goals, as well as engage with the AAVSO community as often as possible. We're trying to have each one of our sections start offering quarterly webinars so that you can engage with people via Zoom, kind of, as face-to-face as we can on a routine basis. As these sections start offering these quarterly webinars, please dial in and talk and let us know kind of the projects that you're doing. Creating a social organization is really that's really what makes AAVSO relatively unique. And lastly, we will be kicking off another annual campaign. The last annual campaign we held in April. It was out of cycle with our traditional process. We're going to move back to the November time period. The reason why it was delayed last year is we thought it was a little bit too much for the new executive director to, attend his first annual meeting a month and a half in and then run an annual campaign about 2 months later. So we're going to be moving it back to November. You'll be getting a kickoff letter here in your email address soon. But in case you're interested, you can visit the URL down at the bottom to learn a little bit more about what we'll be doing. So please feel free to write us at AAVSO.AAVSO if you're interested in any of these things. And lastly, the AAVSO's 113th annual meeting next year will be held down in Huntsville, Alabama at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. I spent a lot of time hanging out in this building underneath the Saturn V. It's a really fun place to go, and I look forward to seeing you all there. All right, next up. Yep. Dave, how are we doing on time? Okay.
First of all, I'm impressed that we're up to 1,600 members. I know you said the numbers might be lower than that.
Yeah, I
That's
think
the highest I recall.
yeah,
in
it's
20 years.
yeah, it's probably lower than that, right?
Okay,
And
still, I'm
yeah.
impressed by that. But speaking of membership, I've always felt that the best way is word of mouth. I know I'm here because Janet Matty literally tackled me and twisted my arm, and I've been happy and thankful for that ever since. But word of mouth is really the best way to go. And what you really need is someone in every astronomy club. We've got people here from all across the country, and you must belong to other astronomy clubs. Just speak about it whenever the opportunity comes up. I do that for the ATMs, for the Springfield Telescope Makers, now for Fort Myers, and it works. People who are interested, if you see someone who's tired of seeing M42 for the 1,000th time, that's a time to speak to them, and maybe they're, you can select, if you know the people, who is ready to step up and do some pro-am collaboration. Regarding NEAF, I think Dennis Conte's talks there for the transits is enormously effective. Every time I've been to one of his talks there, the room is filled. So that's a good way to give talks at specific meetings. But regarding the, you said it didn't seem to be much bang for the buck at NEAF. NEAF is a huge meeting and there's a lot of foot traffic, but we didn't have a booth out there.
Yes.
I would suggest at least give it a try, put a booth that won't cost that much, and you can get volunteers from the AAVSO to man it. But there are a lot of groups there that are doing that, and they have a lot of foot traffic. We should at least give that a try.
Yeah, the marketing committee has discussed that in past years, and we'll put that on our docket of consideration. Thanks, Mario.
Following up on Mario's comment, all of us should have our elevator pitch. And I thought, Brian, give us your elevator pitch.
Oh yeah. So when people ask me about what the AAVSO is, I say that we're an organization that connects amateur astronomers who want to do science with professional astronomers who want their help. And that's relatively succinct. The other option is our mission statement, which is of course to enable anyone anywhere to participate in variable star astronomy. Scientific discovery through variable star astronomy. So either one of those are pretty good. And of course, you're welcome to develop your own pitch as well.
And I have it on good authority that the editor of the Astronomical League Reflector magazine loves the AAVSO. And if you give said editor an article on variable stars, I think it will be published.
Yeah.
So Brian, I was wondering if you had received that note from email from IU.
Yes.
for Deborah. So they were establishing this group that was looking for interactions between amateurs and professionals. And so I wrote back and said, yeah, this looks great because it's like what the AAVSO does. So I just think it would be great if you can somehow, be attached to that group and point out that the AAVSO is doing this for variable star people, so that it would make it easier for the IAU and make it easier for people in that subgroup to just sort of merge with the AAVSO groups.
Yeah, and actually, I will note that Dr. Kafka, I think you were a founding member of the latest IAU Pro-Am consortium. I know I saw your name in some of those original documents, and I've been involved interacting with them kind of behind the scenes. You probably all received some information about their meeting that they're having out in India. I told them that it was a little bit too late to be advertising that to get people traveling internationally. Asked them to push it back a little bit. I said, if you would like to do it in hybrid format, the AAVSO would be more than willing to offer our Zoom streaming resources to you free of charge in order to publish that meeting. And unfortunately, they declined all of that advice. So I'll continue to work with the IAU Pro-Am consortium and try to engage with them. I found it relatively difficult to get them to kind of, engage with us. They seem to want to do their own thing, get their own experiences, learn kind of from the ground up, instead of taking advantage of the last, 112 years worth of advice. So I think, Stella, by your head nodding, I'd say you probably had a similar experience as well. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a very interesting group to be engaged in there. There is potential. At the same time, keep in mind that they're trying to find their footing and trying to be independent as much as they can. That's one. And the second one, when you bring many cultures together, trying to launch a new project, there's snafu's at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I'd say keep at it. They will see the value of the AAVSO, and that's why I got involved to begin with.
Yeah, thank you for those
Yeah,
words of encouragement. Yeah, thanks.
I have a comment online from Jay Miller. And he said, I volunteer at the National Air and Space Museum in DC, which is being upgraded. They will be mentoring amateur astronomy and the AAVSO, et cetera, in some of the new exhibits. I think he meant mentioning. Oh yeah, sorry, he did say mentioning amateur astronomy and the AAVSO in some of the new exhibits. I mentioned the AAVSO when doing solar observing with the museum.
Oh, terrific. I appreciate that very much. So. All right, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just put in. Stand closer. Working.
It's on. Just stand closer.
Okay. Can you hear me? Really.
There you go.
Close. Oh,
Yeah.
that's better. Yeah. I just want to put in a word for the sequence team. Brian mentioned earlier the S News campaign, which I think a lot of people can get involved with because there are really bright stars in it as well. With kind of something for everyone. But really, as the leader of the sequence team, we are always looking for new volunteers. Right. The pay is terrible, but it's good job satisfaction.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
We'll double the pay.
All right. So in the interest of time, I think we should move on to the awards.
So we now come to the fun part of my job, at least, and that's to say thank you. So many people have done so much for the organization, and we want to take an opportunity now to recognize a number of them. We're going to start with the Observer Awards, and Brian's going to do those.
Okay. So as I'm going to call your names, and then as you come up, please come up. We'll hand off your certificate, do a handshake for Bob Stevens to take photographs of, and then head on down. I think we'll probably should do a group photo just to kind of save time. So the first of which is Bob Stevens for his invaluable contribution of over 100,000 CCD observations to the AAVSO through September 2023.
He gets to take a picture of himself.
Yeah, you gotta do a selfie, Bob. So, yeah, and actually, if I could get you to stand off over here to the left.
Okay.
Yep, and I'll hand your certificate. We'll do handshake.
Tim will get the picture.
Okay.
Oh, okay, hold on.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Yep, could we get Gary Walker to come up to the podium? Looks like there he is, okay. So Gary is being recognized for his contribution of over 200,000 CCD observations to the AAVSO's database. Ken Menzies. He's being recognized for over 500,000 observations, CCD observations being contributed to the AAVSO's database. Okay. Richard Sabo. Richard is also being recognized for contributing over 500,000 CCD observations to the AAVSO's database. George Silvis. He's being recognized for his contribution of over 25 exoplanet observations to the AAVSO's exoplanet database. Bob Buckheim. He's being recognized for his contribution of over 100 spectroscopic variable star observations to the spectroscopic database. Okay, and that concludes this year's Observer Awards, at least for the people that are in person. For those of you that are not here, we'll be mailing you your certificates.
Next comes recognizing member service, and want to recognize people who have served for 25 or more years in the AAVSO, and ask them if they would come up, and then we'll get a group photo and hold your applause until we can recognize everyone at once. First is Mark Munkasey for 25 years. I believe he has slipped out. Next is Paul Norris for 26 years. Next is Michael Poxon for 25 years. And finally is Paula Scody for 34 years. Just a moment.
Paula's being illuminated.
Make sure everybody's eyes are open the same.
All right, thank you all. Many, many years. The William Tyler Alcott Distinguished Service Award was initiated in 2000 and is presented to the member of the AAVSO organization for outstanding contributions in mentoring and in promoting variable star astronomy. The board of directors of the AAVSO is very pleased to award the Alcott Award this year to Ken Menzies. Now, let me read the citation for you. For his promotion in variable star astronomy through his leadership and tireless efforts in support of AAVSO Net, as an extraordinary educator in AAVSO choice courses, as a long-term mentor, and through his publications and presentations on variable star analysis. Don't go yet. Ken is involved in many aspects of AAVSO Net and is responsible for scheduling all accepted observation proposal into the network telescopes. He acts as a first point of contact for users who are having difficulty. As a VFOT expert, he has mentored an ever-increasing number of AVSO members and observers, formulating and teaching AVSO's VFOT choice course. Through his publications and presentations, he has taught us all how to generate transform coefficients and to use them properly. In addition to these formal activities, he continues to mentor AVSO members and observers through his extensive, detailed, and patient explanations. Through Ken's patience, sense of humor, and use of the Socratic method in teaching, he has proven to be an educator capable of reaching all students. And I might add, as a personal note, Ken mentored me in trying to teach me some techniques in remote robotic observations. And being an old biologist, I was pretty blockheaded, and his patience was amazing. So let us congratulate Ken.
And if I can mention one comment, sometimes the Socratic method can get you in trouble. Answering a question with a question is not always well accepted, but I think it is the best way. Just giving the answer on the forum without at least asking them to look a little further is not necessarily the best teaching method.
But why? The Merit Award, the highest award offered by the AAVSO board, is presented to a member of the organization for their outstanding contribution to the studies of stellar variation. That award was first presented in 1934 to Leslie Peltier. I probably mispronounced that. Peltier, I'm sorry. On behalf of the AAVSO Board of Directors, the 2023 Merit Award is presented to George Silvas. Congratulations. And let me read the award. And I'm going to tell you a little secret about George here in just a minute. In recognition of the many ways that George has contributed his time over the years towards furthering the AAVSO, not only is he an optical and SID observer, but also a resource person for the instrumentation and equipment section, served on the data quality task force, spearheaded the Egenwart card project, and is one of the key persons in the maintenance of VFOT, wrote the Transform Applier application, updates to the AVSOnet software and web pages, and has ported the target tool to our servers. In fact, there is very little of the AVSO computer infrastructure that has not seen George's guiding hands. It is, boy, is that true. It is rare to find such a willing, unassuming, boy, is that true also, capable, also true, an essential member of our community and one well-deserving of this award. And let me comment personally, a little secret I'll tell you about George. And I've seen him do this. When he writes some new code, he pauses before he hits the run key and he says a secret magic word. And it worked every time. But I'm not allowed to tell you that. Congratulations. And now I turn it over to Brian.
And maybe I'll have you hold these, Dave. And I need the top sheet, right, Elizabeth? Yes, you do. So this year I have I guess every year I have the privilege of presenting the AAVSO's Director Award. And this year, the Director's Award is going to be presented to the members of the AAVSO's Data Quality Task Force. This includes Tom Calderwood,
Matthew Craig, Arnie Hendon, Kenneth Menzies, Mark Muncasey, Gordon Myers, George Silvis, and Ed Wiley. I say with thanks and appreciation for all of your valuable volunteer contributions to the AAVSO and the Variable Star community through your work to ascertain the types of issues that impact AAVSO's data, their quantification of said issues, and their recommendations on how they might be resolved. So if you all could please come to the podium and we'll hand you your certificates.
Arnie, AH.
Arnie.
Congratulations. Menzies.
Craig. Casey is not here. George Silvis.
And Gordon.
And Gordon Myers. Let's please give them all yet another round of applause. All right.
Brian, can I just add that Ed Wiley said, thanks. Thank you, Brian. It was a pleasure to work with others on the committee.
It was a real heroic effort, 3 months meeting every single week with lots of, digging into the data and lots of, I won't say heated discussions, but spirited debates are probably appropriate to look into these issues.
So finally, a little bit of bittersweet as it's time to say goodbye to 3 board members who are rotating off. And I wanted to recognize them and thank them for their service, their insights. And it had been a pleasure to serve with all 3 of them. One is Antonella Noda, who could not be here today. The second is Bob Buckheim, if you would please come forward. Waving doesn't count. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Come on, gotta look and smile.
It's been a really interesting several years. I hope you got value for your money.
Well, for yours, don't go away. For your salary, we did just fine.
Okay.
And the other goes to Ken Hudson. Ken is not here. So we will make sure he gets this. So thank you all. And this, unless there are other questions, this concludes my report, and we have a staff report. Yeah, you have a, come up.
I just wanted to say that the start of the annual meeting, we have already had an extremely generous contribution this morning. So I'm wondering if we could maybe set a little goal for the annual campaign. Sorry, can't talk. To see whether we might be able to get a few other contributions in over before the meeting ends tonight. And you just need to go online and follow the prompt to the annual meeting. And thank you to our first donor. I really can't talk today. Annual campaign. Thank you.
Two of our 25-year members, 25-year member pin actually did not say 25 years on it. And it was some bizarre variability. So I'm just going to come up and give Chris Larson and Dave Cowell their real 25-year pins.
All right, if there's no other business for the membership meeting, the membership meeting stands adjourned. Our coffee break will finish at 11:10, excuse me. Thank you all.